Welcome back, beautiful people. This is episode 76 of An Untold Narrative, where we feature creatives from all different sorts of backgrounds: painters, artists, musicians, photographers, videographers, footwear designers, footwear developers. And today's guest is somebody who encompasses a lot of what I just rifled off as a creative mind, a genius who is coming off of a massive press storm. So we're super fortunate to have him. He has done incredible things with his career, and we're excited to get into it. Nonetheless, we have Omar Bailey. Omar, how are you, man?
David, what's up, man? I'm good. How you doing?
I'm doing super well. I'm so stoked to have you. Obviously, the past 2 weeks have been nuts for you. We'll get into the FCTRY LA stuff that you've been dealing with. But how do you describe yourself to anybody who's brings up your name? Like, what is your elevator pitch? How do you describe yourself? How do you describe what you do?
Oh, that's a good question, man. It takes I feel like it's taken like my entire career or all this time, 20 years or so, to kind of figure that out. And I'm still perfecting it every day because it is so complicated. The way that the analogy that I like to use is, I'm like a rapper that can also produce beats and make its own music. Right. Like, you have an artist who they're great on the mic, but then, if they have that ability to produce and bring that song to life and all the nuances that come with doing that, that's kind of how I like to describe myself in the footwear space.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, no, you obviously have done incredible things in the footwear space. But before we get into that, right, if you look back on your career and your life in general, what's like one defining feature that like you think has come from like your childhood or the way you were raised or something that you really pride yourself on a day-to-day?
Oh man, I think it goes back to like day one. I started drawing sneakers when I was 7, and that was in the early 90s. And it was primarily due to the all of the violence that was happening around the Air Jordans at that time. Maybe some of the listeners might be too young to remember or weren't even born to remember. But, when the wave of Air Jordans hit in from 90 to 95, a lot of people got very excited about it, as you would imagine. But that also invoked a lot of violence. And some of that violence was fatal. And it was a big news story. It was even on the cover of Sports Illustrated, I think in 1990, as well as a famous picture of, a pair of Jordans and a gun. And it said, your shoes are your life. And that was the moment where, my parents decided not to buy me those shoes out of fear of something like that happening to me or something bad happening to me. And as a result of that, that's how I started sketching and drawing shoes. So I would say that was definitely one of those significant, probably the significant moment in my life that sort of led me down this path that I'm still on today.
So you've pretty much always been creative then around shoes. I mean, 7 years old is super young, and like,
yeah, I
don't think many people in high school or even middle school knew like you could become a footwear designer or, that was a career path. So like, how did that passion as a kid of drawing sneakers come to fruition in terms of a career? Like where did you go like after high school? What did you study?
Well, newsflash, I didn't know either that it was a career path. I just did it because I thought it was cool, and that was it, right? So like, I still get messages to this day from friends of mine that I went to grade school with, especially after most recently with the press release, which we'll talk about later. Who were dropping messages in my Facebook or Instagram saying, "Oh man, I remember that's all you would do is just draw sneakers in class." And that was it. Like I'm talking from like 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade. And that was it. So like, both of my parents are from Jamaica. So like they didn't, they were still relatively new to the country trying to figure out like, they're trying to figure out their way and like how to settle in. And they got this like kid who just draw sneakers all day. They don't know what to do with that. What do you do with that? So, they thought, okay, let me throw him in art school and see where it goes from there. So, I was born in New York. I grew up in Florida, ended up moving to Florida when I was 10. They put me in this art school where I continued drawing shoes and sneakers while everyone else is doing these sort of like Jackson Pollock, like abstract expressionist like paintings. And I'm like, what the fuck is that? And I'm just like I'm doing the like very technical sort of shoe drawings, and like, and even when they convinced me not to draw a shoe, it was still very technical anyway. And I realized, just reflecting back on it, I kind of always had this designer's mentality, the way that I looked at things. And I think that had a little bit to do with my dad. He was a contractor. So like, he was a very sort of technical thinker too, when it came to building things and using his hands. So I think seeing that had a bit to do with shaping sort of what my creative output was. And I think when you throw the sneakers on top of that, I don't know, it was just interesting to me to just like keep drawing it. And funny thing is, I still have all those drawings actually all these years later, hundreds of pages, still got them to this day in my house with me.
How incredible. So like you talked about like people messaging you now, right? Being like, I remember like those days. Like, is that like, have you like had a chance to like pause and reflect and being like, man, you know what? I've done something pretty incredible with my life. And like for somebody to recognize that it's been however many years and being like, I remember this kid just drawing sneakers and now you're in the news and all this stuff. Like, have you had a chance to like take a breather and be like, fuck, I like am actually doing something?
Yeah, I especially recently, I really do try to soak in and take in the victories, when you can. It's been 30 years, right? A little more than 30 years of just kind of going after it. And then professionally being in the shoe business, it's been, 20. So like, there's been a lot of probably more downs than ups. So now at this stage, sort of transition into this new part of my career, which I'm hoping is, is going to be continue to be as exciting as it is right now. I definitely appreciate when the wins do come, because I know how hard it was to get them prior to this year.
So that is such an important note. I think with media, with social media specifically, everybody knows it's just a highlight reel and everybody shows the wins, and it's really hard to like talk about or even showcase like the losses, but the losses make up like 95% of the year, right? Like
For sure.
it is a struggle. And so I know people, if they search your name, most likely your time at Yeezy, with Kanye, and now obviously with all the press for FCTRY LA, which we'll get into, but what happened before that? Like how did the kid drawing sneakers go into the footwear industry? Where did you like land your first thing? How did that come to fruition? What's like a memorable experience? Kind of just riff on that a little bit.
Oh, that's a great question, because there was a career before Yeezy. So, when I finished, I ended up, like I said, sketching shoes at an early age, and went to this art school and ended up learning about this school that had industrial design, CCS in Detroit, Michigan. Shout out to CCS. Ended up getting to school there, studied ID, met other like-minded individuals, actually ended up leaving a couple years later, where I went to Cincinnati. Shout out to Cincinnati. And then that's where I got the exposure through internships. So I got to work with a number of different brands, from New Balance, K-Swiss, Adidas. And then when I finished school, I decided that I wanted to work for myself and start my own company. And I was super fortunate enough to have two pretty high profile clients right out the gate, Allen Houston and Gary Sheffield, both professional athletes, professional baseball players. Al was like, both of them were at the tail end of their careers, but they're both still really good friends of mine. I was speaking to both of them recently about the press release. But that was what brought me to China for the first time and really exposed me to the whole machine. So prior to that, I had all this design experience working and interning with these brands, but I'd yet to spend any time in a shoe factory and really understand soup to nuts, like what the entire process is like. And those two projects is what brought me overseas. And I'll say one of the things that I'm the most proud about in that moment is, every professional that I worked with, that I interned with, or anyone in the shoe business, everyone said, oh, you have to go to China, you got to go to Asia, you got to see what that's like. I'm super proud of the fact that I was able to go there on my own, and I didn't go there working for a different company, or working for a company or a brand. And the reason why I say that was important and super significant was because that's what kind of set me on this path to become who I am today, in terms of really understanding all the nuances and all the aspects of the value chain of how footwear is brought to market, how it's developed and how it's created. Versus if I think if I would like to think if I would have gone with a brand, it would probably been a much different experience where maybe I would be more restricted to like a specific area or be asked or told to just focus here and not worry about these other things. I just went there with my eyes open and was just getting my hands into everything, and at the same time building and cultivating relationships and building a network over there that sort of created this snowball effect. And one trip led to the next, that led to the next, that led to the next. And before I knew it, that network of vendors, factories, and people just got bigger and bigger.
So your first business, it sounds like, was you found clients to do your own kind of footwear consultancy. Yep. And then talk, like, I want to deep dive, like, for anybody listening, that we do have a number of footwear designers who listen to this podcast.
Yeah.
When you use the term "I went in eyes wide open," I don't think you could go in eyes wide shut into Asia. Like, that is it's like, even over the past 10 years, it's dramatically changed, right? Like, so how, like, you must have been stomaching a lot of nerves, a lot of stress, like going over by yourself and figuring things out, like, for yourself. Like, how did you make those connections? How did you navigate? Like, there's no signage in English over there. Like, people don't know, like.
Nah, I don't remember being like super nervous or scared or anything like that going over there. I've always been very inquisitive. I've always listened and learned, and most importantly, I've always been a networker, and I feel like that's probably been my biggest skill and asset over my entire career, is the ability to connect with people. And that's something that was taught to me very early on through mentors of mine. I even became a member of Toastmasters. For those who aren't familiar with that, it's a platform all over the country, all over the world, actually, where you basically learn how to speak publicly, or like get comfortable with speaking amongst groups of people. And I was always naturally very shy, and it was probably one of the best pieces of advice that I was given, was to join that enhanced that, or was additive to that inquisitiveness that I had, and just being over in Asia and just randomly meeting people, whether it was having breakfast in the hotel or standing in an elevator or on the plane, right? And then also too, just being American and, being a black male in Asia, I stood out like a sore thumb. And, when people were curious, they would come and talk to you. And, I didn't shy them away. Like, I would want to hear their story and learn who they are. And, usually first question was like, "Oh, what are you here for?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm in business." And then if you're in the places you're supposed to be in to make shoes in China, you're going to meet other shoe people. So they already assume you there for shoe business. And that was kind of how it started. And then just like I said, it just snowballed and and it exploded pretty quick. I became that, American guy who's like always there. I would run into familiar people. I became really comfortable there. Like, I would say in many cases, I was more comfortable there than I was at home, like here back in the States. Cause it felt very home to me. Like, I've built a lot of relationships that I still use and tap into to this day. Friends of mine who own factories in China who've came to my wedding and come like in the States. So, I feel like I really, again, that's been one of my strongest assets, is just connecting with people and building relationships.
So I want to deep dive into, there's a conversation today around footwear design as a whole. Some people lean heavily towards the exploratory design with VR and all the new technology advances, and some lean more towards the technical side, and like, you need to understand how shoes are made to properly design product. Do you think it's one or the other? Do you land in the middle? Do you believe in and versus or like, what do you think there is a craft or a skillmanship that like all designers need to have or be aware of or exposed to, or like, what's your opinion on footwear design as a whole in terms of, the way to be most successful at it?
Yeah. I think just from my story and like the way that I've kind of come up in this space and in this game, there was no manual or guidebook. or anything for me to follow. It was more just like, the breadcrumbs are in front of me and just follow them and see where they go and try to make the best decisions that I can along the way. So, I feel like I would sound like a hypocrite if I said that there was a specific way to follow. I think it's just more about following your gut and allowing and letting that lead you to where it will take you. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs, more downs than ups, but it's also kind of survival of the fittest too, right? So like,
Mhm.
if your objective is to really create your own lane for yourself, you have to follow that path and really stick with it, because it's hard, man. It's tough. Like, I mean, I reflect back on those days from time to time too, and it wasn't pretty. Living in my office and like, having, trying to figure out like if you spend this money on keeping the lights on in the office so you could try and get the next deal, or spend it on food or whatever, like, it was definitely a sacrifice. So I think today, for any designer, young, old, in the middle, it's more about, following that path that you sought out for yourself. The one thing I will add is I think the more diverse you can be, the
Mm.
better you'll be, the better off you'll be. I feel like, my career has significantly benefited from sort of this hybrid role that I've had as, I'm not quite a designer, but I'm a designer. I'm not quite a developer, but I'm a developer, but like I'm a maker and a manager of the process, and kind of holistically have an entire view of how every single part works from end to end. So that's why it's always been for your first question when we started the show, like, how do you define sort of what it is you do? It's always been difficult for me to explain that, because there's so many layers to it. But that would be what I would say is, follow your heart, but make sure you're being as diverse as you can to separate yourself from the pack.
Yeah, because I think you're right. Like especially today, like more people know about footwear design or product creation than ever before, and so it's way more exposed in the media. More kids are coming up wanting to do this as a job. Sneakers are always hot. They've hotter than they've ever been, and it's a cool job, right? Like, what are we talking about? Like, we have the best jobs in the world.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's great advice. Is it's not necessarily about the tool, but it's more about like being diverse, following your gut, doing what you want to do, and pursuing that, and work really hard, right? Like you talked about trying to pay in the lights, right? Like, are you willing to make the sacrifices and work extremely hard? And I want to go into that a little bit. Like, what is over your journey? What has been? Do you remember like a specific hurdle or like struggle that you had that like really sticks out as like, fuck, I can't believe I got past that? Like, I mean, deciding whether to pay to keep the lights on seems like a pretty big deal.
Yeah, man. I got a couple actually. I got more than a few of those. Um, Shit, where do I start? Yeah, you know, out my first trip to China. So when I wanted to go, when I was going to Asia to go work on a project, I had to fund that myself, like to go out there, but I didn't have any money. I was still very, I was fresh out of college, didn't have a lot of money. It was like, I don't know, $1,200 or something like that to go, which, I mean, still today is a lot of cash, but even at that time for me, it was like a lot of money. And I had this mentor of mine, or what I thought was a mentor of mine, who sat on the board of my old alma mater in high school. I'll leave his name out of it, but I'll give that much information. And I remember I was trying to figure out how to go, and I knew it was super important for me to get out to Asia and go on that trip. And I wrote a letter to him and explained why this trip is super important for me to go. This guy had owned this really successful accounting company in New York City. Like, I've been to the office many times. They had like hundreds of employees. So anyway, so I send this letter and explain why I'm going to the trip. I set up even give like a payment schedule and plan, like how I can pay this money back to go. Send it there, and the dude said, and he said no, said he wasn't going to give me the money to go. And I was so distraught, and I was so pissed off, and like, wow, like this is like and all I could think was like, I need to go. And anyway, long story short, like it just motivated me even more to figure it out. And I think my mom ended up like scraping some pennies together. I was able to like bum, $100 here, a few $100 there from family members and friends, and I was able to scrape up the money and go. And as I shared earlier, what that experience was like, that was probably one of the more significant experiences in my life that really set me on this path and going forward. So I would say that one probably sticks out the most. Had I not gone, that would have been could have been a very different outcome.
Yeah, I mean, that's talk about a defining, but also taught you so many things. Like, even when you get an immediate no, like figuring out, it's not about the problem; it's how you problem solve against it, right? Like,
Yeah.
and you're like, I'll reach out to this person, I'll try to borrow here, I'll do this. Like, I know what the long term value is. Don't you think that, like, maybe it's just my observation, but like, I don't think people today are willing to do that. Like, I don't think people see like the long-term vision of these experiences or like really scraping at something to like really prove to themselves that it's worthwhile and believing and like, I mean, $1,200 is a lot of money, right? Like not many people can figure out a way to raise $1,200. I mean, in the internet today, like there's a million ways to do it, but like, I don't, do you think that like we've lost that, like that hustle or work ethic today on like a majority front, or you just think it's like a very unique kind of individualized mentality?
Oh no, I definitely think we've lost it for sure. I think it definitely, you always hear the instant gratification term, come up, and that's one of the things I always tell, people who are thinking about getting in footwear. I'm like, this isn't a real estate deal where you sell a house and buy a house and try and sell it for a little bit more. You don't get into the shoe business, say, oh, I'm gonna start this brand and, make some money and hop into the next thing. You really have to want this. And you really have to want to do it. And it takes time. I mean, it takes years, man. I mean, I've been going hard for like 15 years at it, like struggling, like trust me, I definitely had good moments where, I made some good money, but then very easily you got 2, 3, 4 months where ain't shit coming in and you're trying to figure out how to keep it going and not have to, sort of, throw in the towel and go get a job, somewhere. And that's a lot of stress to definitely to deal with and to manage. And sometimes I don't know how I made it through. I like to think that it was just the drive and the passion that I had for what I did and really enjoying it and at the end of the day too, it was all I knew, right? It was like shit, this is all I know. So I gotta this is what I know. I gotta stick with it. This is what I love and do and just see where it's gonna take me. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't cute. Like I said, the living in my office. I had an office on 35th Street and between 7th and 8th Avenue in New York City, and it was a studio that I got through this gentleman I was designing shoes for, who gave it to me at very little cost. Like he basically said, hey, I have this space. I use it once or twice a year for a showroom. My office is in Long Island. I'll rent this out to you. And I knew immediately I couldn't afford it just by looking at it. He didn't have to tell me how much it cost. I said, I can't afford this shit. I can just tell just by, it's too nice. And he was like, no, we could work something out. So we ended up working out this deal where I ended up designing shoes and clothing for him for this brand that he had and paid him $300 a month. And I did that for a year and a half. And that was how I paid for this incredible studio in the middle of Manhattan. I remember I was right next door to Christian Soriano. He had just won Project Runway. I think he was the first Project Runway winner, and he had used the money that he got to get a studio. So we were both next door. I was 1A, I was 6A, he was 6B. And he was sort of building his career, and I was in there, and I used that studio because it made me look official. So when I had potential clients or people come through, they were come, and he had all the gentleman who owned the space had all the shoe racks and everything. So it looked like a proper showroom. And I had all these samples from projects that I did before. So you walked in and you were like, oh shit, this person is legit. They got this beautiful space in Manhattan and this, that, and the other. So I was kind of faking it until I make it in some degree. And I closed some of my biggest deals in that space. It was the first time I ever seen a $10,000 check was because I had that space. And it really, that was really a launch pad for me in doing that. And that was actually where being Daniel Bailey, shout out to Daniel, where we met for the first time, and he would come and hang out there all the time and with me, and we would be up there like, yeah, we were just both up there just like hustling and grinding. He was trying to figure out what he wanted to do and was sort of like watching like all the shit that I was like just trying to figure out when we were up there. But, yeah.
I love that. So, I mean, that's what it takes, having conversations, catching a break, $300 a month, having this beautiful studio, bringing people in, showing them an incredible experience, and like really lifting off. But it's such a grind. Like people think this shit's easy. It's not. And like, yeah. Shout out to, because Daniel in his own right has built something absolutely beautiful for Concept Kicks and his own personal brand. And that's amazing to hear you guys rocked it in downtown New York.
Yeah, man. I believe that's where it started. I think he started the blog when we were in that space, like when it first happened. I'm pretty sure he can confirm that. But no, man. But people didn't know I was living in that space, man. Like I had a blow up air mattress. I would sleep in that space. Then I would go take like a bird bath in the bathroom down the hall so that I didn't like smell and shit. And then when people would spray it down, and then I would have meetings up there, and people would come, and I would just do my thing. And then at the end of the day, I would live in the building. And then I was also trying to avoid the superintendent, who, they were very clear about people living in the building, not living in the building. So I had to be real careful, like when I left at night to go get food. I had a little mini fridge up there. I basically just would stay in there from like, I wouldn't leave from like 6 to like, 9 o'clock in the morning, is how I did it. So it was all these sort of hide and seek games that I had to play too as well to survive in that space.
Wow. I mean, I'm so happy. That is you don't hear these types of stories anymore. So I hope everybody listening is really appreciating this. And I think this is amazing. I got chills throughout my entire body right now. Like this is one of a kind. I do want to fast forward a bit. You spent a number of years before you jumped off into your latest venture, building the sample room and a lot of the development house and a lot of the work under the Yeezy brand. You were traveling. I remember one time we had dinner in LA, and you're like, man, I'm flying to Wyoming like three or 4 days out of the week. And then I'm flying back home to my family. And like, and you talked about that grind again, another grind, right? Like it was just nonstop. And like, what do you think is like the biggest takeaway from that experience for you? Has it been the learning and keeping your eyes open and then being able to adjust and adopt it to kind of your next venture, or kind of like talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. I think there were a lot of lessons that came out of it. I think one, I feel like I was, my personality and the calmness that I had to kind of deal with all the things that were changing constantly worked a lot in my favor. At least that's what other people, some of my colleagues told me, was that they felt that my superpower was my calmness and the way that I dealt with and managed things. It still wasn't easy, and still didn't mean that sometimes I wasn't screaming inside. But I still feel like my personality and demeanor really suited me for that experience. I think it was just, it kept you on your toes. I knew what I signed up for, and I knew that like there was always anything could change. And, when the Wyoming thing came up, like it was just, for me, it was just part of the deal. And it was like, all right, let's make like, this is what it is. And we gotta do it. But it was incredible, man. Like we had incredible people on the team, and we did some incredible work. And shout out to everybody, on the squad during those times, and the work that we did and the camaraderie that we had. It was, there were definitely moments where it wasn't easy, but there was also a lot of really good times as well. A lot of really fun like product stories, that we have, especially for some of the things that are over my shoulder. I think about the knit runner and the knit runner boot, some of the moments that we had, when we were in California and even in Wyoming, in building these products. But, it really taught me how that truly, like, as corny as it might sound, that like you can make the impossible possible, right? That was kind of the biggest thing through creative thinking, through innovation, technology, and just believing in yourself and what you're doing and the people around you. that you can build anything and you can make it real. And I think even prior to me joining the team, I had lost a little bit of that because I was so burned out from dealing with before that I was basically living part-time in India, and I was flying to India like every month. I would go to India for 20 days, 30 days at a time, then China for like a couple weeks, then make connections through the vendor relationships I had, back to India, then back to New York. And I did that for 3 years, and that definitely burnt me out a lot. And then Yeezy came to me at a really incredible time in my life where I was starting to really maybe start to like question and sort of doubt myself a little bit. So getting that sort of fresh jolt of creativity at like the highest level and being around such awesome people on such a great team, I think really helped sort of bring that that original essence or excitement that I've had for footwear that goes back to when I was 7-year-old kid drawing sneakers.
Wow. Yeah. I think these moments where people transition their careers or take another leap of faith or go work for another employer, usually like you're in it like because you love it and you're in it to like really better yourself in your career path. Like they come at the perfect moments. Like they're like they like for some reason seem to click at the right time, and it's nice to hear that rejuvenated your well-being and your energy again at the right time after being burnt out. Because I mean, what you just described, I mean, we could probably do a whole podcast on those experiences from India to Asia in itself.
Oh
but
my God, we definitely could.
I want to talk about obviously what we're all here like, and we're all so excited. Everybody in the industry. It was from somebody who's gotten to know you a little bit over the past couple of years. It was amazing to see your like Instagram stories of all the different types of people to share and how proud they were and like throw you your flowers, right? When all this news blitz came out around FCTRY LA. And I want to talk about not only what is FCTRY and what you're building and what you want to accomplish with it, but like how is this like been for you the past couple of weeks of like everybody being like, oh man, everybody's been talking about it. I've been on a number of phone calls being like, oh Dave, did you know about it? I'm like, yeah, I've seen it. Like, how has it been for you? Like you mentioned like you're getting news blitz, you're getting interviews, the whole 9 yards. Like what's your feeling right now?
It's been great, man. Honestly, like it really has been, as you mentioned earlier, taking a moment to sort of reflect and think about the path and everything that kind of led to this moment. I've definitely had a lot of flashbacks recently over the last few weeks, just kind of thinking about, everything. I'm super happy. I'm super proud of myself for sure and my team. I have a lot of incredibly smart people around me, a lot smarter than I am, as well, who were able to kind of help me realize this vision and bring it into fruition and a reality, and believing in me enough to commit to working alongside me. So it's been great, and just the response and the feedback has been great. My DMs have definitely been blowing up, and I apologize to anybody who's hit me that I've not been able to get back to or respond to. There's just a lot going on right now. My intentions are good. I definitely, at the very least, want to acknowledge your message. So I plan on trying to get back to those when I can. But nah, man, it's just been incredible and super excited about what we're building and what's to come.
So let's talk about that, right? Like what gets you stoked for the future? What gets you out of bed right now, today, tomorrow, the next day? Like what is FCTRY? What are you excited about?
What gets me excited is the unknown, because there's so many possibilities, right? Like that really is. Even when I think about my Yeezy days, right? Like I was genuinely excited getting up every morning and going into the office because I had no fucking clue what was going to happen. And I like that. And the same thing about this too, as well. I feel like as long as that good energy and effort and intention is there and we're driving it forward, like good things are going to happen. But, but just to be a little bit more specific than that, since we are doing an interview, nah, man, we got some really incredible stuff coming up next year. I mean, Factory, now we technically changed it as FCTRY LAB now, instead of just FCTRY LA, although the LA is uppercase in the lab and B is lowercase to make sure we shout out Los Angeles and our home base in the branding. But it's a democratized footwear innovation lab. We have a B2B and a D2C component. The press release didn't talk a lot about our D2C component, but our B2B is pretty standard, and same way anyone else would work with a brand or a company or emerging designer or influencer or an athlete, in helping them build a product or a product line and take it to market. I think the difference with us, however, is we are fully end to end, not just from the making side of it, but also embracing the marketing and the e-commerce side, or the retail side of it as well, and really creating pipelines or channels to not only develop and produce a product, but also to market and sell it as well. And those are pieces that we're still building out in the company, but we have some really nice pieces already set up. We have some really incredible partners that we're working with. Can't give up too many names just yet, but some really awesome big time athletes and celebrities and entertainers that people listen to this call, listening to our interview, will be very familiar with. And when the time is right, we'll share what that is, and then on the or who those people are. And then on the D2C side, this is actually, if I had to be honest, this is what I'm the most excited about. We will be launching our own products, and those will be coming out into the market, and it's going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to do it in a very interesting and fun way in doing that. And yeah, it's gonna be a good time. So our first drop is going to be very soon. That's all I can say. We're going to have it's going to be alongside of a very massive event that's going to be taking place over the next few months. But yeah, stay tuned. More to come.
Wow, you're giving us nothing right now. I mean, you walked the line all the way around the moon and back, and then you give us nothing, Omar. You give us this isn't an interview. You gave us zero.
This ain't my first rodeo.
No, I'm semi-teasing, but you have shared some of the names you are working with and are going to work with, and I can attest that they are amazing, and they're very exciting people, and I'm sure whatever you're releasing over the next couple of months is going to be amazing. I have a tradition on this podcast. Final closing 2 questions. One is, where could people find you or find FCTRY LAB? What do they search? What do they find? How do they get in touch with you?
The first, so my personal Instagram is just the Omar Bailey, all lowercase, THEOMAR BAILEY, just like Mr. Bailey, the other Bailey.
Fun fact, you guys aren't related. When I started my footwear career, I thought you guys were related for some reason.
Dude, if I had a dime, or if I had $1 for every time that like somebody hit me up, or I'm sure somebody hit Daniel up, probably more people hitting me up thinking that I'm him or we're related or something. Like it's been pretty crazy. And it happened recently. Like I was on a call with someone last week, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we saw this this shoe that you just did with Adidas and blah blah blah." I'm like, "What are they talking about?" And I'm like, "Oh, you talking about the Oslucent shoe? That's Daniel Bailey. That's the other Bailey. Good friend of mine, one of my best friends, but that ain't me." And they were like, "Oh, okay," because we were really confused and blah blah blah. So yeah, and then for FCTRY LAB, it's just all social media, all platforms is at FCTRY LAB, FCTRY LAB. Is how you follow us as well.
Definitely, everybody should check out both the Omar Bailey and FCTRY LAB. Clearly, we'll need to have you back in, like, let's call it a number of months after you've launched some product, and so you could talk about those experiences.
Yeah, maybe 1 month from now.
And the startup life, because I can attest how difficult it is, and there's so many stones thrown your way, and different turns and twists. And the last question, Omar, I have for you, I can't thank you enough for this time. One thing we do, or I try to do, is while people are living and around us, because this life is wildly short and people seem to go way too soon these days, who's somebody who's impacted your life or your career? It could be anybody, professionally or unprofessionally, that like has really inspired you or made you an amazing person that you want to give flowers to, who's, really, the first person to come to your mind, and somebody you want to shout out.
Man, that's a good question. It's more than one person, if that's cool. But the second,
Yeah, go ahead.
more of like a group. So I'll do both, and I'll do it quick. First one's my pops for sure. My dad, he always was very encouraging since I was a kid, even if he didn't fully understand where I was going with shoe, he still supported it. And funny story too that I learned some years ago is that he was actually a shoemaker when he was growing up in Jamaica, or repaired shoes when he was growing up as a kid in Jamaica. I had no clue, and I was hanging out with him some years ago, and I don't know why this shit didn't come up. Like, it just now came up all these years. I'm like, how am I just now finding out about this? And he's like, give me a piece of paper. I give him a piece of paper, and he draws like a shoe pattern on it, and he cuts it, and I know everything he's doing. I'm like, oh my god, like this
Wow.
is like, and it hasn't left him after all these years. So, big shout out to him. And the other shout out I'm gonna give, is actually to a group of gentlemen that I went to college with. I call us the original sort of Fab Five, which is myself, Jonathan Johnson Griffin, Andrew Winfield, Dwayne Lawrence, and Jason Maiden, all college buddies and close friends of mine that we went to school with. Jay was the senior in charge when we came in, as when me and Jonathan came in as freshmen, and Drew and Dwayne. But they were to me like where I like represented where I would wanted to go, right? Like, up until I got to school in Detroit, like I had no clue if I was even making the right decision at all. But when I went there and I met them and saw that we were all on the same page and like-minded, and Jason Maiden was working on Nike product because he was an intern the summer before, and he was going into his senior year, and seeing that stuff like up close and personal, and just being around that energy of that group, it really let me know at that moment that was the best decision that I made in going to that school, and it really kind of set things off. So yeah, shout out to the original Fab Five and my pops.
I love that. It's cool. I mean, you obviously, that group. I mean, Jason Maiden obviously stands out, who's done incredible things in his career, and I'm sure all of that entire group of your friends has come a long way, and I think
Yep.
that's super special, and definitely hold on to that moving forward. I think that's a really cool story to be shared. Omar, episode 76 did not disappoint. Thank you so much for your time and sharing these stories. We probably could have riffed for an hour and a half, 2 hours, just on everything that you got to share.
Definitely. Yeah, we can break this out in little compartments, next time. So I'm down. You just tell me when and where.
Amazing. Well, best of luck. Everybody watch out for FCTRY LA. Look out for Omar. They're cooking. They're in the lab, baby.
That's right.